Evan hated hospitals. The sterile smell, the hushed whispers, the cold, impersonal atmosphere, the constant beeping of machines, it all filled him with unease. The rhythmic sounds were a reminder of the fragility of life. Confined to room 313 for 2 weeks after a nasty fall, his discomfort grew with each passing hour. The days seemed to stretch endlessly, each one blending into the next. The pale green walls seemed to close in, and the flickering fluorescent lights did little to dispel the gloom. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on him. Evan longed for his cozy bed at home. He missed the warmth of his own blankets, the familiar sounds of his house, and the comforting presence of his family. The first night was the worst. The darkness seemed to amplify every sound, every shadow. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of the curtain made him jump. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong. He felt a constant, unsettling presence, a coldness that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was as if the hospital itself was alive, watching him. Fear, raw and primal, began to tighten its grip on his young mind. The shadows seemed to move and every noise felt like a threat. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The second night, the whispers began. They were faint at first, almost like a distant echo, a soft murmur that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Softly at first, like the murmur of wind chimes, barely audible. It was as if the wind itself carried secrets, whispering them through the cracks and crevices of the old hospital. But as the hours ticked by, they grew louder, more insistent. The whispers seemed to synchronize with the ticking of the clock, each tick amplifying the eerie voices. Evan strained to make out words, his blood turning to ice. He could almost discern phrases, fragmented sentences that made no sense but filled him with dread. The whispers seemed to slither from the shadows, pronouncements of dread that sent chills down his spine. Then came the movement. Shadows danced and twisted as if alive, casting eerie shapes on the walls. The door creaked open, slowly, deliberately, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Terror choked Evan's voice. He could hear the hinges groaning, the sound echoing in the silent room. He wanted to call out for his parents, for a nurse, anyone, but fear froze him in place. His throat tightened, and his heart pounded in his chest like a drum. He watched, paralyzed, as his toys began to dance on their own. They moved with a life of their own, spinning and twirling in a macabre ballet, casting long, sinister shadows on the walls. His toy robot, a cherished birthday gift, sprang to life. Marching across the floor, it slammed into the wall, its mechanical voice distorted into a guttural growl. Evan cowered beneath the thin blanket, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The room grew colder, the air thick with a palpable dread. The whispers intensified, forming coherent sentences now. "Mine," they hissed. "This is mine." Evan knew, with terrifying certainty, that he was not alone. Something else shared his room, something angry and possessive. Then, he saw him. A young boy, no older than Evan, materialized from the shadows in the corner. His presence was both unsettling and sorrowful, as if he carried the weight of countless years. His skin was pale as moonlight, almost translucent, giving him an ethereal glow that contrasted sharply with the darkness around him. His eyes were hollow, reflecting an ancient sadness that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of time. He wore a hospital gown, stained and yellowed with time, a silent testament to the years he had spent in this forsaken place. "This is my bed," the apparition whispered, his voice barely more than a breath, his voice a chilling rasp that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "You took my bed." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and sorrow. Evan, paralyzed with fear, could only stare at the ghostly figure, his mind racing but his body frozen. His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape this nightmare, but his body refused to obey. The room seemed to close in around him, the air thick with an unspoken dread. The next morning, Evan's frantic cries finally brought the nurses rushing in. He was incoherent, babbling about a ghost boy and whispering walls. Assuming it was a nightmare, the doctor moved him to a different room, hoping a change of scenery would help. But the peace Evan craved eluded him. Although the whispers faded and the ghostly boy was gone, a bone-chilling feeling persisted. An oppressive weight settled over his chest, suffocating him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, followed. As darkness fell once more, Evan noticed something strange. The shadows in the corner of his new room. Were they moving? Taking on a familiar shape? The temperature plummeted, sending a fresh wave of terror crashing over him. The ghostly boy, his eyes filled with a chilling sadness, began to materialize from the shadows. "You can't hide," the ghost boy's voice, a mournful whisper, sent chills down Evan's spine. "You're trapped with me now."